Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tankie Therapy. It's been a while. It's been a little minute. It's been maybe a month. We got Adnan, we got Jay, we got Lara. There's a lot going on. Obviously, I do feel like we should probably catch up. The summer is like, in terms of online media and online podcasting, summer is when you see like a big drop in numbers typically because people are like, doing their summer thing and whatever. In the case of this genocide, obviously, that's been strategically employed by the genociders and their imperialist backers, in the sense that we've really hit this moment of full blown cover up of the genocide, right? Like, they're not reporting it here. It's not in any of my feeds. It's complete lockdown on the news. It's actually, and they've also killed so many journalists in Gaza that there's a lot fewer people to actually report it, and it does seem like they're hunting the few remaining journalists. So basically, it comes down to shows like us to keep talking about the genocide, keep talking about, like what role we have played in it, to talking about obviously resistance. But so I guess in the first instance, I want to check in with you guys. How are you doing? How you been holding up? Why don't we start with you, Lara?
Um, Start with me. Adnan and I pre-gamed earlier today, so that's the state I'm in. I am in the throes of book writing. I have a couple weeks left, and so I'm. That's actually been helpful, honestly, because I've been looking at the ways in which empire colonialism, settler colonialism, and with specific focus on Zionism, of course, about the ways in which our psyche is targeted and all the ways in which identifications are sort of mobilized. And so I feel like even though there's been so much that's been happening and the terrorizing doesn't stop, there's also a way in which being hyper focused on the mechanics of that has helped insulate me and inoculate me, and really has helped me continuously like read the logic of like why this happens. Sina, like you were saying, that they're hunting down reporters, that they're hunting down people, that they want us all to think that Gaza is a fait accompli, that it's just done for, that there's no future. um, Being in that space and dwelling in that space has been really helpful. And then I also was able to go home, and being home was so meaningful and so important and so soul nourishing, and a reminder of like those of us who are, you know, forced to leave home and to live in diaspora, not because we want to, but because of the ravages of empire, and to kind of just reconnect in those ways. So that's where I'm at. Good to be with you guys.
Thanks for that. Jay, how are you doing?
Man, I'm doing all right. I think the interesting thing about what you said is that you're right, like there's no news, there's no reporting, that's happening. But when I log on to Twitter, for instance, my DMs are full of 50 Palestinians who are asking me to share their messages. And like, I mean, obviously there's survival campaigns, right? Like that's a big part of it for them, is just a constant, like, there's so many. I mean, I've been working with some of these folks at Lifeline for Gaza and setting up this database, this algorithm basically that has, it may be up to 1,000 by the time this gets out, like around 1,000 Palestinian survival campaigns in it. And it's just watching that is also like, it's an amazing tool, but it's quite daunting when you look at it too, because anytime you log in there, there's usually somewhere between like 8 and 25 campaigns that are at the top that have not received a single donation in the last 5 days. And you think about like not just what that means materially to folks, right? Obviously, like it means they can't buy food for their family if they haven't had a single donation in the last 5 days. But it also means that like nobody has given anything to like that they the loan, just the sense of the world just leaving people alone to die, right? And like what that the toll that must take, which you just can't imagine. Like I try to put myself, you know, I can't even say that. I can't even say I try, because I know that I cannot put myself in the psychology or the mental state of what it must be like to try to survive a genocide, to have methods of digital communication to reach the outside world, but then just struggle to get people to like retweet or repost, and like asking people to do that all day, and then going through doing that all day and then not get donations for like 5 days too. Like, and I like, I'm not blaming also everybody on the outside, because I think that there are so many. It's so overwhelming for folks, I think, that, and we only have so much money, all of us, that we're able to like really contribute. But it's still, I mean, I just wish that, I don't know. I mean, I know that that's like this, that's this like treading water kind of thing. Like it's it's not what any of us want. The place that we want to be is like, think about, okay, how do we crowdfund for 1,000 survival campaigns to try to keep as many families as we can alive? Obviously, with the situation we're in, it's kind of what some of us are doing, but it shows how far we are also from, I mean, the things you were talking about on your struggle session today, Adnan and Lara and the other folks that you had on there. um just of how do we get to a place where we could actually have organizations and, have institutions or states, right, that could make impacts on something this grotesque. And we have a long way to go there. So I think there's all of that kind of sobering reality on a day to day. And then there's like, I worked all day today, and so now I feel guilty because I'm like, oh, I didn't log in and boost those campaigns today. So now I'm going to try to do that before I go to bed. But like, you know, uh and really not, like, a lot of that is just so that they don't feel like I'm just leaving them out there, right? Like like, that's to me. And so I guess that's the thing about the news, is there's plenty of Palestinians in Gaza still who are telling people all over the internet what's going on. And but there isn't like, they're blasted by the algorithm, right? So some of us who are like, we're constantly retweeting these things, of course they get shown to us, but a lot of the world doesn't actually see that either. So I don't know. I don't know where that leaves me, but that's what all the stuff that's on my mind right now.
Yeah, that's the same thing that you open up and you're just overwhelmed with how many appeals from people there are. You try and boost them, do what you can. Every midweek, you listen to Nora's report on electronic intifada, and your heart breaks and tears flow. What can you do? I've been keeping very busy talking about these things, doing a lot of like recording and discussing and, even investigating what's happening in the justice, accountability. What can I hold on to and boost and support that might look like it's an organized means and mechanism for holding these disgusting war criminals to account at some point? Like, just the feeling, we've been, Justin had posted and discussed actually about Mira, who's on, a tweet thread a while ago about people feeling just, watching the level of starvation that's happening in Gaza and feeling hopeless and helpless and angry and vengeful, a politics of revenge. So the only way I can think of making that actually productive rather than destructive is to say, turn that rage and that anger into an absolute determination that we will not rest until these people's lives are destroyed as war criminals because they have no peace, whatsoever. And so that's what I try and, kind of think. How can we do things that, even if I cannot save, we cannot save or stop what's going on in the timely manner that we want, we will raise the threat that you will pay a price. And that might actually do something now if we are focusing on that, because that's the only thing these politicians care about is their careers, and that they might pay it. If they feel like there's a possibility they may pay a price politically, legally, if we direct, instead of just having protests that march around, doing nothing, and but not actually directed in any way. Go to some politicians' homes and stand outside and make their lives miserable. I think one of the best things I had heard about was the group that had camped outside of Anthony Blinken's, house. And they seemed a little nervous about the fact that there were 50 or 100 people who were there around the clock and telling them that he was a killer, that he was killing babies. That kind of shook them. And I think they ended up forcing, or breaking it up, and forcing those people not to be there as a constant presence, reminding. So those are the kinds of things I think are what can sustain. But then also, I do think in some ways the situation is turning, and it's not going to be these individual. We may help a few individuals with our, donations and boosting their appeals and so on. But as Jay was saying, I mean, that just raises the prices of the limited food that people are competing for. What we have to do is we have to end the siege. And I do think that there is some collective shift starting to take place. When I saw a video recently of some congressman in Wisconsin, Brian Stiles or Stale. They definitely are stale. They're all very stale, these politicians. He was completely shouted down and forced to really end this session with his constituents early and leave the stage under a hail of boos. And, when you see like some guy who looks like he's a, 60 or 70-year-old white man gesticulating like wildly saying, "You're killing babies. Do you support a genocide?" You think something has changed a little bit in like middle America. And that gives me some hope if we could direct that into some kind of productive response, some meaningful political sort of pressure. So those are the things I hold on to. And of course, always, Thursday and Friday when the Ansar Allah statement comes out and you see, that it's Jummah prayers and afterwards a demonstration and they have 1 million people in the street. And the other day, just a couple days ago, I saw, a video of a beautiful boy, a Yemeni boy, 5 years old, going with his family to the protest for Palestine solidarity, dressed in his traditional Yemeni clothes, carrying a plastic rifle on his shoulder and saying, "Free Palestine, we're going to like stop." That is something. That is something. And I think people in Palestine see that, and they know that their brothers and sisters in Yemen are doing something. They're not forgotten.
Thank you for that. Thank you guys. That was so we do these shows obviously, and it's part of our jobs in life or whatever, and part of our fields to discuss and analyze and whatever, right? And in the case of these last coming up to 2 years, I did want to make a point to say we are fewer than 7 weeks out of October, 2 years from October 7th. So we should think about that for a second, that it's been 2 years. But in general, the task of what we do is to sort of put forward like, okay, this is an update. This is what we've seen. This is what we talked about. But something, and I know that people appreciate our work. I know that people appreciate my work. All of you, I know that there's like, and this is something that you don't obviously do it just obviously for appreciation. You do it because it's right to do it, and appreciation is great. But ultimately, you just do it, right? Like this is not like, talking about Palestine is just something I've been doing for 20 years, and it's just something I do, and I'll do it until I die or until it's free. And even after Palestine is free, I'll talk about it. And I think that's something we all have to do. And it made me think about like this, I've always sort of said that this is like a watershed moment for our species. It's a watershed moment for our planet, for our ecologies, by the way, in a bad way, quite frankly, that this insane genocidal Holocaust is rapidly like using up the dwindling like timeline that we had in terms of ecological collapse, that like Zionism will drag down the entire planet with it, it seems, and the American empire too. But I can't shake the feeling that like in our society we have good people, right? I mean Westoids. We're all Westoids. We all live in the West, um, and we make our lives in the West and our careers in the West. Well, some of us actually. Lara, you tried. They didn't let you. They chased you out. Get out of here. But notwithstanding, Lara, we live in the West, and this is it's like we have to live in this environment, and like frankly, I can't help but think that like I live in a society of sociopaths who like they don't feel like they certainly don't. The majority of them don't care in the way I care. I know that. I can safely say that. Is that like a a litmus test? Not necessarily. I don't think so. But like it is something, right? It's something to think about. Like, and in my own personal life too, I've struggled with this. Is that like a friend of mine put it this way? She said, "All I'm not interested in anyone. Like this has become the Gaza Holocaust has become my entire life, and I'm not really interested in being close to or speaking with people who aren't in that same space, that I have like nothing to share with them." And unfortunately, I've been stuck in this mode that like, this is like for the rest of my life, I have not what am I going to say to like the people I knew before all this that like I didn't really talk to during all of this, that like I've had people reach out to me and like discuss stuff, and those people like they obviously like they know that I have this show and stuff, so for them it's like, okay, this is, but for the vast majority of most of my social groups, there has been this hushed up like, okay, this has just become the backroom, but like the background noise of, and I think about that, and like, so the initial sting of that I'm going to take out of it by saying I think that's been the case for a long time, and imperial violence in the Westoid mind just doesn't appear. So the fact that this Gaza Holocaust, as acute an example of imperial violence as it is, I don't like the fact that it hasn't devastated like the entire structure of our society at an interpersonal level. And maybe it has in ways, definitely not the entire society, but maybe maybe it's manifesting in other ways that we can't see, that you're not allowed to articulate. I mean, censorship works and it's working, but I just think of the fact that there are good people in our society, and then there's the rest. And how do I in that framework even think about like continuing my everyday work in like trying to like improve my local society? Or do I just do what I've been doing, which is live online and like talk to you guys and like just live in like this new space that exists, which is called the internet, which is like a new place where people go. And this is something that like, and I'm like, this is the people who are interested in this. A lot of them are online. A lot of them are a phone call or some sort of like, I have to mediate my communication with them through my phone in one way or another. So, the locality of my life is kind of like lost, that I don't know what to talk to people in like normal situations. Like, oh yeah, did you like, you don't spend your whole day like looking at these horrible videos? Like you're not boiling in rage all day long? You're not the guy who's saying, tie me to a missile and fire me in Tel Aviv? Like if that's not like your entire personality by now, then what do we have to talk about? Like what am I here for with you? And I struggle with this. I struggle with the decorum of like Westoid life, which is you ignore the empire. You don't talk about it. You don't mention it. You certainly don't call it an empire. Only those kooky communists use that word, right? Like liberals, as if they ever refer to the US empire, right? Like the entire liberal class, the US empire just simply does not exist. So for me, I mean, I guess We have an actual therapist on Tankie Group Therapy, which is like an actual bonus. It's not unlicensed therapy hour, uh, which it usually is. But and I think about that and the bitterness that's now growing into my heart of like, oh, this society is garbage, and it deserves to be to go straight into the dustbin of history. And it seems like our ruling elite agrees with me in a sense, because we haven't talked about this yet, but the US empire is declining rapidly. Abu Naranha is doing authoritarian regime stuff. I don't live in the US, so I'm not really getting what the meaning of this is. I can't tell if it's more just like mediatic. And also, like, the people who are screaming about it are also like mouth frothing liberals who have no problems with authoritarian states and this kind of stuff when it's their own guy doing it. So I'm like, oh, whatever. So maybe the Americans on this call can tell me more about that. But, it does feel like the decline is real. And there is a weird, if the like this genocide is not free for the US empire. That's my kind of closing thought and salvo, that this is costing the empire in more than just obvious ways, which is like munitions, money, trade, all kinds of diplomatic whatever. But I think the general chaos that seems to be, at least at a distance, engulfing the great Satan, seems to be, at least in some ways, let's put it this way, karmically related to the Holocaust that the US is leading. That, like, the majority of the population doesn't seem, at least if protest size is reflective, doesn't seem to have too much of an issue with. And, even as much as the rightoid, chuds have been talking out more and more and speaking out more and more, that they won't actually do anything about it. That it's all, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I can jump in just a little bit because I think there's multiple things happening. Like, I think that like what Trump's doing domestically, he would have done whether there was a genocide going on in Gaza or not, right? When you start to really study things like Project 2025 and like the way that the right has been moving for decades, there is this trajectory, which, like, Callie Akuno is one of the people who raises the alarm bells about this in the most, like, consistent and I think principled way. And a lot of people just don't listen to him, I think, because they don't want to grapple with what it really means if he's right, which is he just says, look, these people are prepping for a civil war. Like, they are building up their forces in that direction, and they talk about it, and they are continuously kind of moving in that way. And so, like, if you look at LA, right, with, like, the ICE raids, and then obviously the ICE raids are moving through, farmland and other places, all around the country. But if you look at LA, right, and I don't have an answer for this entirely, right, because this stuff happens, they go in, they raid, and organizations defend their communities as they should, right? But on some level, that also then the government then uses that further. Not that they need a pretext, because they really don't, right? But they'll continue to escalate, right? So they'll continue to send more violence, more, use it as a, say, oh, we need to bring in National Guard, et cetera, right? And part of this is all like just red meat to their base too, right? Like, these liberal centers are these chaotic, it's the post George Floyd propaganda that we all saw in election ads all over this country. This idea of cities just burning, liberals burning down their own cities, in this kind of, so there's that. And then, like, and DC thing is really interesting. I mean, part of it is just a power play of, like, I want to take over DC. It's in the Constitution that I can do this. And so, I'm going to take it away from this liberal mayor. And, you know, eh, there's no democracy really in DC anyways. Like, it's basically like a colony within the empire. But I lived in DC for a while, and, like, DC is a very weird place too, because you have certain pockets of like kind of black and brown communities, and then everybody else works for the Pentagon or a defense contractor or a lobbying firm or like some major law firm or the government, right? And so it's such a bizarre place to live because all of the liberals in DC that are like, well, white folks basically, right? They're all working for some part of empire. So even if they're liberal, they are liberal in exactly the way that you laid out, Sina, where they don't care it.
They're
Like,
neolibs.
yeah, and they're look, the weapon sales are great for them, right? Like this is the reality of it. And those people have never really, I mean, they want all of DC to gentrify anyway. So like they don't care about the families in Southeast, like, and so um yeah, I don't know where that, but I think part of what's happening in DC is also this like I'm making a blueprint thing. He's got LA going, he's got DC going. He's like, he wants to continue, and part of what he's doing, I think, is testing, will federal forces, right, all just go in line with us doing more and more domestic policing action through National Guard and so on, right? And I think that they will, but this is also part of a testing. Like when Kali talks about this, he's like, this is a part of what this Trump 2.0 administration had to consider, was like, if they say, hey, there's no more elections, like, will I be able to mobilize the armed forces to defend that? And like, will some of these groups buck and like say, oh no, we need to stick to, the Constitution and the procedure, and like, and I mean, I'm sorry to say that it's working quite well for him so far, unfortunately. And I think that part of the problem is that, I mean, people on the left, we've kind of seen, I think, over the last couple of years that we're probably a lot weaker and fewer than we thought in terms of people who are actually like anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist and give a shit about some of this stuff. And liberals, I don't like, I don't see a fight in liberals. So I don't know, man. I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't mean to sound like, too catastrophic. And look, for the sake of the world, that might not be, to the point that you raised earlier of like, I find it hard to care about a lot of these Westoids now. Like that might not be the worst thing if we have some kind of wild, I mean, it would be terrible for us living here, but like, and we know who would face the brunt of those consequences. But from a global standpoint, I think you're right. I think there is a lot in the heart of empire that is kind of spiraling down. But I don't, who knows where it'll go. I mean, people also are like really pissed off about the Epstein stuff. Like, that is a real thing that like every person and I mean, the extent of it, right? What was it? The Israel head of security yesterday or the other day who got arrested in Vegas and then they just let him go back to Tel Aviv? Like the types of these stories that we're seeing on a kind of recurring basis. I don't know. I sound like a total tinfoil hat person right now. I know, but it's all crazy, man.
I mean, it's reality. It's, truth is stranger than fiction was what my clinical supervisor once told me, and you end up learning that. And this is what we're seeing. But I think one of the things, Jay, to your point and to what Sina was saying, is that in many ways, I think, yes, the brunt of the violence of the decline of empire, we know who that's going to fall on. But these are parallel universes that are already being lived. We see that with the ICE raids that are happening, who has protections and who doesn't, who gets kidnapped, who gets disappeared. In the context of the settler colony, now known as Canada, the indigenous women that are disappeared all the time and don't have the same protections. And so in many ways, I'm not downplaying the crisis of fascism and what is more to come. And we know there is more to come. And I think it's really important actually for us to stay ourselves against that, if nothing else, to fortify these relationships. Like you were saying, Sina, I don't see that as a downfall. I see like this is what we're going to need, and likely probably also need to go underground, but to make sure that we retain our ability to not only think through these things, but act in response to what's happening, but to remind ourselves that, you know, the dual settler colonies that we all live in, this is the end point of that from the beginning of their inception. And that's not a pedantic point. That's actually a really important analytic for us, that as we're seeing this sort of intensity ramp up, in the same, we can look at the parallel of what's happening in the Zionist settler colony and say, this endpoint, this is the only potential outcome that could have happened if the dismantling of the settler state didn't happen before, right? Had there been a dismantling of the settler state prior, any one of these settler states we're talking about, perhaps we wouldn't be in a place to see this genocidal atrocity we're seeing right now. But because it continued on its way and was allowed the ability to hide and guise itself as a quote unquote democratic state, as an outpost of empire, all these sorts of things, I really don't know how else we could have imagined this would have unfolded, right? And I think that's a rallying cry for all of us. In many ways, I think if this is the place we're going to be, I prefer it that it's this clear. Because like you were saying, you know, Sina was saying earlier, I think many of us said, is that this is not, you know, we didn't wake up to this yesterday. And whether it's talking about Palestine or empire or capitalism or any one of these things, that so many of us have been kind of sounding the alarm for so long because we live in this other existence simultaneously. And there's a way in which that, for me, touches the experience of being somebody who doesn't live in my homeland, that there's a way in which your heart is always in one place and your body is in another, right? And I think they're also what deepens relationships and solidarity networks. Like those of us who don't live at home have always had to sustain relationships online, right? And before it was online, it was like calling a central, like a central phone in the village where somebody would go, or writing letters or something like that. So in many ways, I think we're living in a world that has existed for so long. And I'm not actually afraid of that. I think there's something really important about the deepening of relationships, because at the same time, I have lost relationships. Actually, I've deepened more relationships than I've lost. Now, part of that is because I wasn't fucking with Zionists beforehand. So that was easy. But the amount of relationships that have deepened, the ways in which the circles of solidarity across the world have increased, the ability for me to sort of track solidarity networks across continents has definitely increased. And that's the part that I think is really important for us to hold on to. And like Jay was saying, like, if it's going to come undone, again, it's going to come undone. Like this is, if those of us who commit to revolutionary processes, like that's always the promise of revolution, that this shit comes undone. And here we are. And I think we're in the middle of it, and we're seeing what that looks like. And it's messy, it's violent, it's not sexy, and at the same time, there's inspiration and depth and love and fascination. And I'm amazed every single day at the shit we're seeing that 2 years ago we weren't seeing. I really do that reality testing exercise with myself all the time. Like I was just recently on our way back from Lebanon, we stopped in Italy, and in the middle of nowhere Italy, on like a turn, there was graffiti on a wall that said, Gaza lit up the world. This is in like rural Italia, and Palestinian flags everywhere. And just seeing that the majority of the world is rallying for resistance. And we can think about Palestine as specific to Palestine. I think that's really important, but also specific to the type of revolutionary world that all of us care about. Maybe it comes hand in hand with the decline of empire and the undoing of everything, and us reconfiguring what our worlds look like and what our social relations look like.
Yeah, I do think politics could conceivably be totally transformed as a result of the dynamics of the communities that are formed, the solidarities that have been created, the consciousness that is being born as a result of the genocide. The unfortunate part of this is that the right wing has also been galvanized, motivated. This has been polarizing, and it's been activating on both sides. You see that the morbid kind of features and characteristics of this decline of the West, and it's not just the United States, but it's the West as a whole. In fact, in some ways, Europe is even more precipitously plunging into economic sort of collapse because it doesn't have the military Keynesianism that is sustaining and floating the United States, just as you were saying, Jay, that it's good for the economy. There, almost everybody, if you actually, this is so interesting that you said that, because a few months ago I was kind of thinking, and I was like, actually, who isn't somehow kind of, if you're not just a kind of low-level worker on a farm or something, you're complicit in the U.S. empire, in the war machine, one way or another. Whether you're providing, kind of intellectual kind of rationales and narratives and cover, as all the media, and public intellectuals seem to be doing, down to all these almost the only production that takes place industrially in the United States is related to the military industrial complex. If you actually really look at it, it's like, what is the US economy now without the military? And in some ways that's just the same as what Israel is. I mean, it's they mirror each other. They're really the same kind of thing. It's just one is a small, more crucible in which you can see it happening, and people delude themselves in the US. But what it shows is that we are perhaps in a moment of real transition, and these are dangerous moments. I mean, the liberals historically have thrown in their lot with fascism when it comes down to it. And they did so in Weimar, Germany. I expect them to do the same, now. But we are, and my colleague and friend Ariel Salzman, quoted the Gramsci, famous Gramsci quote, that the old world is dying and the new one has yet to be born, and now is the time of monsters. I mean, that's what we're seeing, these morbid kind of phenomena of a declining empire that releases its carcinogens and its pathogens and all of that in the most vicious, virulent sort of form. It's very dangerous. What is it? It is really, we are living in the time where it really is socialism or barbarism. So when it comes to like how Sina was feeling about, can you even like imagine a future life in this kind of society and with people who just sat by and, let it happen or joined it or cheered it, and, that it's just so impossible to imagine what you have, as a basis of social life with people who don't commit to like standing for the dignity of the human, on a basic level. That this reminds me that like, do I want to be spending my time fighting for the West, in the West? For what? For multiculturalism in Canada? To defend multiculturalism? To defend the university? This bankrupt, kind of institution that has shown its cravenness and complicity in all things, and is, a way of just siphoning off intellectual critique into these safe ways and professionalizing. It's disgusting to me that, I have to spend my time fighting to save the humanities and the social sciences and all this kind of stuff because they're cutting in this austerity. They're destroying, when we were saying what they're willing to discard and destroy. Well, they're also getting rid of their universities. They're getting rid of all of these institutions. They're crumbling. They're willing to destroy them to save, Zionism. They don't care because it's the end, and but do I want to invest in that? It's like, okay, normally, shouldn't I fight to save history, save the literature and all that? And it's like, why? This is a sinking ship. We either have revolution or we're going to have barbarism. So I don't want to prop up multiculturalism. It's like, we got to go all the way and we have to figure out a way to have revolution, or this really isn't, kind of worth it. And so, when you were talking, Jay, it was like, you don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, or, this is a sickness. There is a sickness here. There really is. And it's at all these levels of all the elite institutions, the intelligence agencies, organized crime, it's all interrelated. And this guy, when you were saying, oh, this, just in Vegas, somebody so closely connected, and he's just sent back home. You know who you sound like? You sound like Marjorie Taylor. What? Sorry?
He escaped.
He escaped. And nobody's trying to get a hold of him. Yeah, he just escaped. Sorry, we couldn't. You know what it sounds like? You sound like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Okay, the only one who said anything really about it on the right. It's so bizarre. And so my friend David Yagubian, who was on with me last Friday, we were going to have a topic to talk about American decline and decline of the U.S. empire. We didn't get a chance. We'll have to do it again. But he framed it in such an interesting way that I think is so true. The sick man of the West, okay, and the Western question. Okay, all those things in the late 19th, early 20th century, they were talking about the Eastern question and the Ottoman Empire and, its lands as the sick man in Europe. Reverse it. It's not just a sort of fanciful thing. That is, in fact, actually the question for the world, is what to do about the sick man of the West that is a dangerous beast that is ready to lash out and take us all down with it. Like the the Israelis are, the Samson option. It's like, well, how do you, friends at Resistance is Fertile put it, how do you boil a psychopathic frog? Because, if he learns that he's being boiled, you could go nuclear. And it's the same with these morbid groupings within the United States, is that, if they really feel that if they really get the picture that the decline is happening, what violence and barbarism are they capable of? So when you said, Lara, that this is the end point and we need to know and understand that this is the pathology of settler colonialism, the question is, yes, we must recognize it. And then also, what's the best approach to deal with it? Because I have a question for all of you. And I'm looking, what's my way out of this? Do I want to stay and fight? No, I want to go. I may have been born in the United States and raised in the West, but I speak languages, thankfully. I learned some languages. I'm a Muslim and I could go to some Muslim countries and be, pretty happy. And maybe there's a way to get out of this thing. But, the question is that I had for all of you is I've been feeling that something is so broken about this situation and has hurt me so much and traumatized me so much in this situation that I believe Palestine will be free. But even when it's free, there's going to be a hurt to have realized what kind of pain and suffering we allowed to happen before Palestine was free. I don't think I'll ever be free of it. So when Sina, you said, I'm going to keep talking about it, and it's important to keep talking about it, not only for history and to remember and all that, but also I feel like I will never really recover from this kind of trauma. And I wonder, what do you feel, and how can we, and unless it's the therapist, how do we recover from this trauma, even when it's
I've
free?
thought about this so much. I've thought about this every day. I wondered about this, that it's not just we'll have to grapple with this our whole lives. We'll have to, unfortunately, relive it. But here's the kicker, is that's that's actually the best case scenario in a way, because that's presuming we get to live out the rest of our lives and not end up dying in ecological calamity and living in Mad Max times. Like that's so like living uncomfortably with the knowledge that the Gaza Holocaust like live, you know what I mean? That, and like living into your 80s and whatever, that's actually like the best case scenario at this point for all of us.
You're right. I
Because
mean,
that, you know, I honestly feel that way, that like, oh, you know, I'll have to think about this until ecological collapse, until, because I'm so okay. Before we start dooming on that front, there's sort of an interrelated questions here, and the thing that I wanted to answer in that question that you asked, Adnan, is that this is I don't think you're supposed to heal. I don't think you're supposed to. This is the wound we carry from now on, and the reticence of our part of our society to confront that reality, to confront is I think a part of a deeper denial of what the West has always been, which has been this 5 century long genocidal rupture of our species, riven riven our planet into, you know, indigenous and settler metropole, or, you know, indigenous and settler life, and obviously the settler life reigns dominant and is destroying the planet. I mean, indigenous people were, let's put it this way, in charge of global resources for millennia, and they kept the planet going. And the West has dominated the not just consumption but production of resources for a good 5 centuries now, as their ascension into the sort of dominant, let's say, cluster of countries or whatever powers, you know, in and its evolution, or people can say devolution, into what it is now, which is this monstrous um, Frankenstein beast of, you know, different settler colonial entities ruled over by, like, you know, Krang in the stomach America. That's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reference. I knew you were going to get that, Jay. That Jay would be the Lana. Do you get this? Krang. I don't know if you were. Okay, good. I wasn't going to presume. I don't. Do you get this? Who Krang is? I don't think you get who Krang is. He was this brain creature who had a fake body, and it was like this big muscle man, but it was this brainless creature. He was a robot, basically. And that's like the West, and that brain creature is Washington or New York, and it's like a weird mix of Washington and London, and to a lesser degree Paris, and it is an organic being inside, and that's the West. And we're watching that Western order die, and it's sacrificing large swaths of the planet as it goes down. And so it sacrificed Ukraine, it sacrificed Yemen, it sacrificed Syria, it sacrificed Iraq, Afghanistan. It's now that this genocidal rage of 20 years, this undeclared regional war, right, that we never discuss, even in our circles. We don't like talk about it in these terms, really. Even resistors don't link it all together. But this phase that we're in, the Gaza Holocaust, which unfortunately may be like the precursor to a larger regional / world war. It seems to be headed that way. I really hope I'm wrong. But like this bloodletting is part of this kind of sundowning moment, that we're forced to watch this imperial beast, you know, meander the roof of its palace like the fucking Abu Nuranha, just walking around on the roof, completely losing the marbles. That like he's obviously still not, like, he's like running. How many years can this man run on Filet-O-Fish? And, you know, like, and Big Macs, like, it just, this body won't live, right? It's not. And it's so perfect that this guy is like the accelerationist figure who's
it's
like
the tartar
actually
sauce, clearly.
yeah, like this freaking dark tartar sauce fucking Immortan Joe who rules over the US, whom Americans are just like, yeah, this is what you gotta do. You gotta elect this guy. Obviously, like, okay, he's burning everything down, but just elect him. Like it seems like the death spiral is real, that we've all agreed to it. And I mean, it's so strange. In Canada, you have people being like, yeah, death to America. Like in my rural Ontario town, I made a joke about death to America in the grocery store. She's like, yeah, man, I've been saying that since the 60s. And I was like, what? I was like, okay. That like the planet hates the US, the planet hates Zionists, that there is a pure form of rage about all these insane economic wars, that, you know, all these things, the system is breaking. And hitherto that system held itself so arrogantly as, oh, look at this, you find anything better than this? You got KFC, you got Whataburger, you got anything you want, you know what I mean? Like this is like the Americans, they really looked at this and said, look, you're never going to get any better than this. This is the end of history, as Francis Fukuyama put it. Like he looked at fucking global Burger King. I was like, that's it. That's it. 5,000 years of human political evolution done. This is it. Put the crown on top. We are the Burger Kings of all time. And like, it didn't even last 3 decades. That Pax Americana, whatever, put it at 1980 or something, 70, whatever. You could do it from the 20th century. Maybe the 20th century was America and it's already done now. And this insane bloodletting in our region, which is expanding, you know, that it's part of that decline. And I've sort of held that the whole time, is that Iraq 1 less so, Iraq 2 though, certainly Afghanistan, these were all attempts to correct for something that couldn't be corrected, which is the US wasn't going to be number one. They looked at China, they look at Russia being independent, they see that they had their chance with Russia in the 90s, they lost it. They thought China was going to be completely just a solved problem by the 2000s. I mean, maybe by the 2000s, definitely by the 2010s, they knew that wasn't going to happen when Xi Jinping took over. But even before then, the 2000s, China was going independent. It was not just going to be like the tech and resource hub and the cheap labor imperial, which is like, I think the imperialists fantasized. And so I think they set upon this goal, this insane, violent, undeclared regional war, to correct for all that, to assert, you know, a kind of global control over the most precious energy resource, which is oil, which is the sort of gateway to a drug, a much more intense drug, which is called the US dollar. And so maintaining the dollar, and so maintaining a hold over the petrodollar, sort of motivated these, you know, this sweep of genocidal wars. Obviously the entity played a role in all of this. The entity also sensed its own, you know, future being in question, being like, yeah, America's this American imperium is not going to last forever, and what are we without this American imperium? So we better make this thing go as far as possible and use up every fucking, you know, just squeeze that sponge dry, which is what Zionists do, which is what imperialists do to each other. And so it's like a weird confluence of forces. And yeah, we're not allowed to talk about these things in global terms. We're not allowed to sort of discuss them in this sort of broad swath and be like, yeah, the West has made like an undeclared genocidal war in like sometime in the turn of the millennia. And we're living 25 years after that. We're living in that, and it's, you know, focused mainly on this region, but radiating outwards to other countries in different scales, albeit. And this Holocaust in Gaza is one of these sort of, let's say, keystone moments of this slaughter. And the fact that we are 7 weeks away from October 7th, that the Gaza resistance is still hunting down these Zio stormtroopers, that God knows how many mercenaries fall, because we know the Zionists aren't just fighting alone. The entire West is throwing everything they have at Gaza, and yet they still reside. They still resist. And so, like, for however bleak I come off in these sessions, that's something that's still like, man, you think that the sort of Hollywood version of history isn't true, but it's not the Hollywood history. It's like, actually, there are good guys in histories, and good guys win. Not all the time, mind you, but in this case, we are on the side of the good guys, and we cheer them on, and we cheer on their work, and we do our best to show them that they are the good guys. And so I guess in some ways, this next phase, especially you're looking at the UK, you're looking at all these laws, these intensification of these pathetic Zionist censorship laws, that the next phase of this will be, the attacking journalists on this side. Obviously, it's been happening for a while, that the sort of limited leeway that we've enjoyed will probably come to an end. I mean, I've been saying this for a while now, and Jay and I talk about this obsessively of when's the shoe gonna drop? Because they could. These monsters are happy to do it. You think they would care, be like, see you later, Easton's podcast, like delete, control alt delete on my Patreon, control alt delete on my YouTube. Like they did it to all those Russian channels, and like liberals cheered it on, clapped for them, right? Like erased like hundreds of thousands of man hours of work on like different shows. Like I was thinking like Rachel Blevin, like the names, I don't really know the names, but like Abby Martin lost her entire archive. Like they can delete you in the West. And so I'm never far off away of thinking Africa Stream. Yeah, you're right. Africa Stream, they just like, they can just do that. And like sometimes I think like, yeah, what do they do in the case of me? Anyways, that's like a different question. But I do feel that like this moment that we're in, the imperial powers see that they're losing, at least in some ways, the sort of spiritual battle of our humanity, that people watch the news with disgust. And they know, I do, as much as I feel that like our society doesn't care, I do feel that they at least know. And they know that what's real is that like this fucking entity is doing literally the worst thing humans can do to each other. And they're doing it, and they're doing it proudly, and holding up signs like sandwich bills over themselves saying like, we are doing this, and like pointing like in the fucking Wojak memes, and just being like proud of it. And so we are forced to live among them and live in their and live in institutions where they hold absurd amount of sway, to the point where my old institution, UCLA, is getting sued by the federal government for being too anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, they unleashed brown shirts on teenagers, and we watched it live, almost murdered some, and it was swept under the rug. No media coverage, nothing. The liberal media barely made, a little bit. LA local media did for a bit, but it was never pronounced as a scandal. Like, it's basically like almost akin to Kent State. Okay, no one died, but people but that kind of scene is an insane thing, that like were it some other sector of our society that isn't sort of openly hated the way Palestinians are, that would be cited as basically like a kind of racist pogrom that they did live while California police were watching, fucking LAPD were watching. And this was all done in the open. And meanwhile, UCLA is groveling and paying students for that. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. Like, and this was why haven't I burned my fucking PhD from them yet? Actually, I should. Why don't I do that? Maybe I'll do that live. Maybe I'm promising that, folks. Man, I'm gonna burn.
I think you will get views for
my
that.
My mom will be so upset. Oh my god, I have to like photocopy it and pretend. Oh, I gave it away. Shit.
But it's interesting that you were mentioning. I mean, there's a good reason to build a greenhouse. People have to have resources that are based in their land and location and things, because you're absolutely right. I mean, all of this could be just taken away, sack people, they're shown that they're ready to kind of cancel the university. They're ready to take down all, alternative media when they think that it's important to do so. So, I mean, I think you're right to have these thoughts, it seems to me.
One of those thugs, by the way, at the UCLA counter protest that beat the shit out of people, he was brandishing that. He actually went and joined the IOF and is fighting in Gaza. So this is the thing, when people are like, oh, you're over exaggerating, or like, what is the connection between what's happening in the context of the United States or these encampments in Gaza? It's just like that pedophile who escaped to Tel Aviv. This is where this person is going and like volunteering to be a genocidaire. Like it wasn't enough that you could beat the shit out of fucking pro-Palestine students in the context of the United States. You actually needed to go volunteer yourself and be in on the action, right, of being a genocidaire. And I think that that's really important. I mean, to your question, Adnan, about the trauma, I mean, I don't want to sound like this is not a masochistic thing. I want this to be seared on my consciousness forever. I truly want to live with this and brandish this as part of the historical moment that we are living, as a way so that it's not just Palestinians who are having to bear this. It's a way to register this and not allow and refuse people to delete this from history, to erase it from our memory, to make us, you know, to fuck us up and say somehow it didn't happen or it wasn't this bad. I mean, every atrocity we have studied, have had shoved down our throats, rightfully so, have rallied against in our entire history, is all happening in Gaza at the same time. Like everything you read in books and you go, this is fucked up, I can't believe this happened. We could go down that list and say all of it has happened within the context of 2 years in one place. And that's why I want it seared into me. And I think I have a dear friend of mine, Avgi Sakatopoulos, who talks about how the field, our field, clinical psychology, is traumatophobic. There's this way in which clinicians want to run away from trauma and rush to repair things in the same ways that liberals want things to go away and don't want to deal with any of it. It's like you don't get to live in a world in which the conditions are possible for a genocide to happen and you don't get to feel what that means. And then to rush to like, I want to heal from this. Even all the healing circles, and I'm not bashing people needing a space. You know me. I'm not saying the emotional space for us to reconvene and recover and all that, but the over focus on moving past is one other way, is another neoliberal strategy, like multiculturalism, where it's just like, this is not possible because it's disfigured and disorganized and reoriented our entire world. And there's something about being able to hold on to that and stopping ourselves from thinking about trauma just as entirely soul crushing, but rather, what does it mean to, this is what Avgi talks about, how do you generate something from it? Because again, going back to the place of people who have always lived this, like there are people who have always lived along what is now understood as traumas. And this is the world we live in. I mean, I was just in Lebanon, and you hear drones, and there's a breaking of a sound barrier, and like that's the world I grew up in. And when I was evacuated in 2006, and that's how I started graduate school, the psychoanalyst I was seeing kept insisting that I was traumatized. And I was like, the only fucking thing that's traumatizing is how racist this country is. Like that shit is a part of my world, and it's what's created the person that I am. And if I have an analysis and a political analysis of why that was happening, because I understood the geopolitical reasons why, for example, when I was in high school and doing, finals, the power plant less than a mile away from me was bombed by Israel. I understand that. That is not a personal trauma. That's a political issue that transmutes itself, of course. It imprints onto me. But that's why I want to keep it as a register. And if we think about all the ways in which revolutionaries throughout the world, I mean, people who fought for Algerian liberation, they carry that with them. There's documentation of that. There are people who fought alongside Fanon who still talk about that. People in Vietnam, it's still seared into them. Every revolution that we know of, you don't just walk away from that. To the contrary, you hold on to it. And I think there's a way in which you were talking about the politics of revenge, Adnan, earlier. It's like, I will never forgive and never forget. And I don't think that is embittering me. I think that actually keeps me aligned to the political commitments I have to the world. I do not want to be in a world in which I can forget, if from the smallest people to the fucking genocidaires that are documenting their war crimes and thinking they can go on vacation afterwards. I never want to forget or forgive. And I think that that's actually a political platform for us to have. What does it mean to continuously keep in consciousness the price that has been paid, who paid that price, whose blood had to run for this to happen, and if nothing else, for us to continuously have that in the forefront of our minds. I think that's a small price to pay, right? And it's clarifying.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because, we had, in fact, actually, that's the feeling behind, or you put into words the feeling behind why one of my most recent episodes talking about Palestine and the world was there is no post Gaza. I mean, there can't be any post Gaza. Like, you can't just get past it. You can't forget it. And whatever the world that it is creating, it's with us, So you can't ignore that or get over it, etc. But what you said really, really helped.
Yeah, I appreciate it all. The big struggle for me is the most mundane stuff. It's just like I mean, I was joking with you all before of how much I'm looking forward to my kids going back to school, and then this conversation reminded me that the thing that I will really struggle with, that I always really struggle with, is making small talk with other parents when I'm picking my youngest up, you know, and just that just that difficulty of like the things that they will be, because of how unhinged Trump is right now. Like, I live in a very liberal place. They will be they'll probably be concerned and be wanting to talk about politics in some way, like a lot of them are on like the local Democratic Party, committees and stuff like that, congratulate themselves for going to what are those, the No Kings marches, that kind of that kind of stuff, and
Registering for them and sending in their information, by the way.
yeah, it's yeah. um and I mean, the difficulty is it's like the sort of the way I navigate that often is to try to talk about sports, which I know is like just a coping mechanism, but it's like I literally can't talk to you. Like, I don't, like, every time I have mentioned Palestine to me, you have said you have like blank deadpan stare of like, what, something happening, like, you know uh so you know um that's the hard part. Is actually, for me, it's like the people, I'm fully with you in terms of like the long lists of people that that I'll never forgive, and that I will kind of cherish being vengeful for the rest of my life. But there's this other layer of people that I have to interact with on a daily basis who are not like ardent Zionists, or like would not say that they want bad things to happen to other people in the world. They think of themselves as like so loving and caring and community creating within the small town, but are like just also totally, I mean, and as like you said, Adnan, nobody is not complicit, like we've been having these great conversations with Samantha Youssef recently, who's a Palestinian Ukrainian animator who's been working for Disney and all this stuff for all these years, and is finally like coming out and speaking out about the culture and like how it all works, and is a fascinating person to talk to. But she's just like, look, we're in these little workspaces and we're told to do this little thing, and like my job is just to like, but she recognizes now that she's a cog in a wheel of psychological warfare that is like pro empire, and also is was helping even through like some of the animation work to develop rendering technology for drones probably that are being used in Gaza. And she's Palestinian background, right? So like the kinds of, but she didn't ever know that, you know what I mean? Like she's coming to that level of consciousness after decades, and then after, especially when she talked about being Palestinian post October 7th, that she started getting like death and rape threats from all the people in her industry and stuff like this, right? And so it's like that is just one example, but as she's saying this to us, I'm like, we all have some version of this experience. Like we all have done stuff to, you know, to contribute to this empire in some, like you can't live in it and not somehow be some kind of cog in this machine. And that difficulty of like, how do you shift from, I think where you're at, Adnan, which is, you know, it's been something on my mind for a while, is like, how do we shift from like being a cog who's trying to convince other cogs of like, you know, some stuff along the way, to like throwing sand in the gears, you know, and you know, helping this thing collapse while convincing other people that they need to join that effort in order to bring about something completely different. And I think that's the hardest part, is the desire that so many people have to hang on, or to like go back to the glory days of Barack Obama or something like that. You know, like this is the liberal dream, is that maybe somehow we could get another neoliberal in there who like is really chummy and can make us feel, you know, hopeful about the future of this settler colony. And, you know, I mean, as much as I talked about all the stuff that does seem like it's collapsing, I just want more people to come to that recognition and to think about then, okay, so how do we position ourselves strategically as this thing is going down, to be able to, you know, figure out what we're going to do with each, you know, together. And it's just very hard for me with a lot of the people that are around me. And this, I think, is to Sina's point early on of like, you know, so a lot of us live in these kind of pocketed communities. You know, when I used to work in West Philly and I could go by the, you know, the Lebanese bake shop or whatever else and see the Palestine flag in the window and talk to people who were coming in to buy radical books, I had a totally different feeling, because I was like, there's so many cool people who are, you know, on the right page, who are coming in here, who are trying to figure out like how to organize and do this thing. And so I think that's part of it too, is just that, I don't know. I mean, the suburbs are done. Like that, like, like I live in the suburbs, and it is hell. Like you know, I can't imagine a worse place in terms of, you know, the kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It's just, but like a liberal suburb is like the worst version of hell right now, I feel like, in America. So anyway.
I guess the funny thing, here's my thing. I'm not an American. I lived in the US for a long time. Mind you, it was California. So it's like it's like a different part of the US than, you know, I guess whatever. I mean, US is not a real place. It's like it's a continent linked together with like powerful military, economic, you know, industrial base. And its identity is based around this kind of like facile, you know, whatever, caveman insistence on freedom. And yet I have a certain point, I'm like, and I think that the chuds are finally saying it now for the first time, but it's like your entire country is like, they like you're not allowed to sort of question this precious little ethno state, and its priorities are your priorities, and your life, like gets worse by the minute. Everything goes up. You don't have health care, but the ethnostates, precious residents get health care. Like all of your military is like, if you're like a nationalist chud in the US, if you're like a don't tread on me kind of chud, how do you look at your boy, your orange little boy, like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, like on pharmaceuticals, Abu Nuranha? Like, how do you look at that and be like, yeah, we're the big fucking swinging dick of the world, or yeah, America? Like like Americans think of the US as Hulk Hogan, but it's not Hulk Hogan, like, I mean, or Hulk Hogan is dead. And like, this is like, it's over now. Here's the darker reality. Like, we can laugh about, like, and I asked this question, but like, I think for the more, like, that's for like the chud imaginary, like asking that question to them and forcing them to reckon with the fact that like the entire basis of their like chest thumping nationalism is openly horseshit. And this ethno state stomps on your fucking legal jurisdiction any day of the week, and it doesn't matter. So, but then to our side of the aisle, God, listen to me, but like on our side of like the planet, like we also have a duty to like speak to the facts, which is like this moment, this Gaza Holocaust has exposed once again, but in a particularly acute fashion, that the whole business of the West and how it triumphed over Nazism and then Soviet whatever and authoritarianism, how all of this is just artifice for the fact that a certain kind of European white supremacy has been unleashed on this planet for 5 centuries, that it has reached its apex in the form of this two-headed monster called Zio America with 4 Ks and like, or 3 Ks, whatever, in true communist fashion. That's how you spell America. But like that like the reality is that like this project of settler colonial expansion, which is headquartered in Washington, which has a legacy office in London and in France and other sort of European centers, but we know where it's in control of, that it's also industrial and economic and military means are also in control of it, such to the point that they sacrificed the largest country in Europe basically for kicks, just to sort of bleed Russia, right? They sacrificed Ukraine just to bleed them, and it didn't work out in its favor. So they decided to dig in and bleed the entire continent to bleed Russia, which is what they've done, and unleash the most reactionary forces upon that continent, and just get this concert of mouth frothing chuds all obsessed with the same thing: Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. And of course, October 7th exposes all of that, how all of that was fraudulent, that the entire basis of the West, of this legal order, triumph over this and that, is all just horseshit fraudulence. And everything we work towards is to manifest that fraudulence and like the sort of ethical overlay of our intellectual, cultural, media class, various sectors, sort of legal, juridical, the NGO, whole fucking, that whole beast, all of that. And this includes the sort of DEI initiatives. This includes the racialized minorities and their sort of base, their ruling elite, whatever. All of them work in concert for this fucking empire. And reality is that like that working will be more and more chaotic as the US empire itself gets engulfed in its own contradictions and its own anachronism, to the point where like this Pakistan-India war showed how a certain kind of tech facing down another certain kind of tech, which is to say Chinese versus European tech, in terms of jet warfare, is that like, oh, that it didn't play out, that this supremacy that Europeans enjoyed and their descendants and these honky Americans, this honkified, whatever, honky tonk Euro supremacist continent called America, and it's like subcontinent, Canada, Australia, whatever stuff, resource things, that like, yeah, it's over, it's done, it's done, it's gone, it doesn't matter anymore. And so that sort of like Unfortunately, it's going to be Dylan Thomas, and it's not going to go into this night quietly. It's not going to, and this is unfortunately these fronts of all these genocidal wars, the most violent being the one in Gaza, acutely violent, and how the reaction and how like the basic operation of our society is now in open display, that some people get to have more sympathy than others, some people get to be more human than others, some people in this system of human rights, some don't count. That's it. You just wipe them off the earth. It's okay. It's no problem. They're just there's just another indigenous people written off as a sacrifice, in a fucking Conradian sacrifice to some altar of imperial progress. And we're gonna have to live with this. And I guess my something that like makes me the sort of return to the sort of opening point which I made is that, like, how do I live in the West while this happening? And for the people, here's a bit of good news, is that the people of the West, specifically the UCLA SJP, I meant to bring up UCLA earlier and talk about this. UCLA Students for Justice in Palestine donated $800 to my kid, Muhammad, my friend in Gaza, and his friend, actually. So I thank you. If you're listening, I thank you, UCLA SGP. And you made my day. You made Muhammad's day. I know that when he found out about it, he like flipped his lid. He was so happy. So like in that moment, I realized that like, yeah, there are good people that I have to fight for and get to know and befriend and make them part of my like node of friendships in this otherwise sort of like bleak hellscape. So I do want to sort of end on that. We're an hour and 20 minutes. We should think about wrapping up, but you want to sort of do round the horn and on concluding remarks. Maybe we should start with you, Adnan.
Just very quickly, maybe if you're looking to develop that kind of community, start with the cashier who said, yeah, death to America. I've been saying that since the 60s. She sounds promising. Maybe cultivate that relationship. But also just on that, like, point, are we team Deep Seek? I mean, Team DeepSeek is looking good. Are we Team JC10s? Yes. I mean, they're doing pretty well. Like the Chinese tech is, there was like this Australian tracker, of like strategic technologies, some sort of strategic institute, and it's based in Australia. And of course, they're totally xenophobic and they're just like hyping the paranoid threat. But what they did do is examine, over the last several years, which countries are, in which positions in 60 some leading technologies across the range, green technology, everything, all the kind of key things, AI, etc. And China is like 56 out of 61. It was the world global leader. And if you'd done that even a decade ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the US would have been in a very dominant position on those. This is changing very rapidly. And that's the reality. And that's, of course, why China is in the crosshairs. And so even though the kind of genocidal violence has been directed mostly at West Asia for the last 20 years, as you were pointing out, it absolutely has been 2+ decades of unremitting war on the region. Another target is China. And that's one that I don't think they have really that much of a chance against, like that's sort of gone. And I think some people get it, which is why they're, even like a buffoon, like you were calling them chuds, like Pete Hegseth, they're refocusing on a kind of neo-Monroe doctrine in some sense, because they just know they cannot really, kind of control the world the way they imagined that they were going to be able to when
it's done.
Yeah, it's done.
If you can't do that, if you're an imperialist and you can't control the world, you've failed. It's civilization, you have lost. Game is over. No more turns. It's done. Sid Meier's says
Game
game
of
is
risk.
up.
You
You
lost.
can't.
Yeah. So anyway, I would just end my final remarks by saying that for all the doom and gloom, there is some hope with the global South, particularly. I'm not that impressed with what BRICS is doing. I'm not that impressed with like the economic orientation. You wish there might be a little bit more geopolitically ideological kind of sense that we have a system and an alternative, and we're not just trying to have win-win deals, but we want the world to actually flourish. And that means we're going to have to sort of hem in this, or at least kind of keep contained this dangerous Western, collapsing, but like, ready to lash out kind of force. We've got to kind of contain it and push it aside, and also to recognize that there is genocidal intent. Those 2 decades that happened for West Asia, but they plan that if they could, they would plan the same thing for China. So China, help out a bit, like let's like, save these people so that Iran is not like, doesn't collapse under, I mean, I don't think actually it's going to happen now. I mean, after that 12-day war, I'm pretty confident, my friend David Yagubian, we just talked about it. He's very convinced that there won't even be an attack on Iran. I don't know, for a while, a serious one anyway. I don't know what to make of that, but the point is that there is some hope, especially if those forces that are actually organized and strong, might realize that actually for the future of the world, for the future of humanity, they could play a big role in stabilizing, a real future for humanity, because the alternative is, just the declining Zio imperial West trying to take us all down, or let environmental collapse take place in the next generation. So I have some hopes, that's where I would look to as some possibility. We can do our part, but in a way, actually, there are bigger forces, out there. And if they actually took a different kind of approach, the world could be very different.
I'll let Laura close us out because I don't have anything like super inspirational to say, and I know that she'll bring us home on a good note. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess what I would say is just, yeah, shout out to all the folks who have been doing the work, for one, to put together a lifeline for Gaza. Like it's a bunch of people, and they're just like tracking down, talking to Palestinians, getting their campaigns on that website. And I think that's a really cool project. I think that has given me some good feelings lately, just to be around those people as they're working to do that. And yeah, I mean, the resistance is continuing to give the Zionists hell, and all solidarity to them in that. I'm grateful that we live in the same world as the Yemeni people. And I hope that, as we kind of have talked about, that you know that more and more of the world steps into the void of humanity that we're kind of faced with, I think, in terms of just, I agree that the to what I think Lara said it earlier, is like the peoples of the world are largely, at least if they're the type of people who care about anything, then they're with the Palestinians, and I think that people are rightfully just revolted by the Zionist entity and by the United States's and other Western countries like constant backing of it. And I just think that, I mean, I've felt like this for quite a while, but I just feel like maybe we're starting to see more countries. I realize a lot of it is posturing and like, trying to avoid consequences, like we talked, whether it's legal consequences or political consequences for themselves or whatever, of continuing to be on board with this thing. But I think that, there is a kind of global awakening that is happening, and I just hope that sooner rather than later starts to see some bigger shifts in tides, that we can start to really measure where we feel like, okay, things are actually moving in a different direction. Because I think that's the thing that's been hard about the last few months for me, is that it's just there's a lot of people doing great stuff in the world, but it's just hard to see the kind of momentum right now. The momentum doesn't feel great right now. And so I hope that, we can start to see that, and that we can all think about, ways also for ourselves to be a part of that. So
Every time Jay and I are on a podcast together, some loser has been prior academic writes a piece about us. So you said Yemen and we're together. So it's going to set off the alarms. This is Zionist, bankrolled loser. You were saying, Adnan, about what team to be on. I'm team Shahata. Shahata in Arabic means slipper or flip flop. And like, that's the fucking way, man. Like and that's what I mean about like us being able to be too attuned to those things. And maybe this is part of it, Jay, is like seeing the momentum, is like, it shows us in the most mundane of ways, but also most moving of ways, about what having a cause, a commitment, and wajib, a duty, means. That you forego all the trappings that we are told we need to wage a fight against these largest machines that you all have been talking about. And like, they're bringing them to their fucking knees in Shahada, right? So like, that's my like sign out, is sort of being like, remember that there are people who, by the way, are being starved. I think about this all the fucking time. Every time we see a video of resistance fighters who are fighting for their dignity, their land, their people, their right to liberation, are also being starved. And they go out in their shahata and they say, fuck you, motherfuckers. This is my land. And I'm refusing to disappear in the ways that you would have me disappear. And like, that's the alignment. That's the alignment for me.
It reminds us of the Muntazar Az-Zaidi, right? The guy who threw his shoe at George Bush.
Right.
What a hero.
Shoes have a very big place in our culture. So like, the way they're transform and become weapons of liberation is really important.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Adnan, Jay, Lara. Thank you so much. It's been over 90 minutes. This is a good one. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, everyone who donates. Thank you, good people out there who are organizing campaigns. Just keep talking about Gaza. Keep talking about, find somebody to sponsor. It's crazy. We grew up watching, and I know we're supposed to finish this, but like, I just have to say this, like, we grew up watching these strange ads of like random kids from like the global South, like World Vision and stuff. And like later on, I learned that like that stuff was like basically CIA cover for God knows what. And like for instance, like Serge Duss, who was the head of World Vision for years, his son is Matt Duss, who is the political advisor to Bernie Sanders. Like, very strange world. Like, the humanitarian world is a very dark world. And the West uses humanitarianism as a fig leaf to further their own nefarious things. So it's just, I don't think, like, part of our own difficulty is like of a scale, is like recognizing the scale of the evil of our societies. And I think if there's anything in our something that we do as a group in this kind of work, and just being online and being, like haters of our society and like haters of our ruling class, is to like point out that, yeah, you guys are like moralist goons. Like you guys are sociopath, like vampiric goons. And we are inside of humanity. And most human beings aren't like you. Most human beings are like me, and they recognize other human beings as worthy and dignified. And it's you fucking vampiric goons who are just, who see the world as this carcass that they can suck resources out of. So anyways, that's me concluding the episode. Tie me a missile and fire me. Tie me to a missile and fire me at anywhere at this point. Okay. Bye, folks. Bye, folks. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, listeners. Thanks, guys. Yeah, we got to wait 1 second because Podcastle does this weird thing of like cutting off. Okay, I'm going to press here now. Okay, and end. Oh, end session. Okay. Oh, end session.